The plan worked, my husband exclaimed, his voice filled with satisfaction as he gestured around my late father's house. It might be old, but it's spacious and well located. From now on, my parents and I will live here, he declared. How did I ever love someone so selfish? I thought, staring at Ryder's smug smile growing wider by the second. As I stood there, too shocked to speak, he continued his tirade. This house of your father's is mine. Get out, he demanded angrily. As his parents' belongings were carried in, I realized Ryder had no idea what was truly going on. Seeing his misplaced confidence, I couldn't help but laugh. My name is Maeve Honeywell. For years, I had lived with my father and my husband, Ryder, after my mother passed away when I was in high school. My father had raised me with endless love, and my bond with him never wavered. When I suggested that Ryder and I move in to help care for my father, Ryder had eagerly agreed. Are you sure? My father had asked, his smile warm, but his eyes filled with concern. He didn't want to be a burden, but when I shared my heartfelt wish to stay close and Ryder supported the idea, he finally accepted. As Ryder and I unpacked in my childhood home, my father had smiled gently and said, "This is what I've always wanted." I had mentioned it was also more convenient for my work, and he made us coffee, his usual warmth shining through, a moment we both appreciated during our break. Later, Ryder suggested, if you want, you could quit your job to take care of your father full-time. Surprised, I asked, "What do you mean?" He explained that, with fewer expenses, I could focus on my father. While I appreciated the thought, I was wary of relying on Ryder financially, so I decided to keep working for the time being. A month later, Ryder brought it up again. Living with my father had eased many of my household responsibilities, and I started to seriously consider the idea. When I shared my concerns about the financial impact, Ryder reassured me, "Don't worry about that. I'll handle everything." Eventually, I made the decision to leave my job and focus on caring for my father. At first, my father objected, encouraging me to continue working, but he understood when I explained my desire to be present for him. However, things quickly began to change. "I'm home," Ryder would say, and I'd greet him warmly, but he started to grow distant. One evening, as I was watching TV with my dad, Ryder snapped, "Can you keep it down? I'm eating." "Oh, sorry," I replied, startled. His attitude toward me had shifted, though he continued to act normal around my father. I worried that quitting my job had added stress, but all I could do was apologize. Then came the late nights. Ryder began coming home late without answering my calls. One day, I received an email casually informing me he was on a business trip. These trips became more frequent, and he stopped informing me altogether. When my father noticed, Ryder brushed it off, saying, "No problem, I'm working hard for our family," though his smile seemed less genuine with each passing day. Then, out of the blue, I received an email from my mother-in-law, curt and devoid of pleasantries, asking for Ryder's work address. My in-laws had always been cold toward me, so I replied cautiously, asking why she needed it. Our response came in a furious phone call. "You've made Ryder take care of your father while you sit at home. He's back at our house because of you. He forgot his lunch, and I'm trying to bring it to him. What are you going to do about this?" She snapped. Stunned, I pieced together the truth. Ryder had been staying with them during his so-called business trips. My heart sank as I realized the implications. Ryder had encouraged me to quit my job, but it seemed his motivations were far from genuine. Fighting back tears, I gave her the address and ended the call. Needing to steady myself, I made coffee in the living room. My father joined me, his presence as comforting as ever. Smiling, I asked, "Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some," he replied, his smile warm and familiar. As we sipped our coffee, my father began to reminisce. "Your mom and I argued a lot when we were younger, but we always stayed honest. Couples who can argue and then make up grow stronger together." His words struck a chord. I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. It was time to have a serious conversation with Ryder. "That's true, Dad. Thank you," I said softly, and he responded with a warm, reassuring smile. Later, I emailed Ryder, summarizing my conversation with his mother and expressing my desire to talk. "I'm busy. Don't make a big deal out of this," he replied dismissively. His curt response made me sigh deeply, frustration and anger simmering just beneath the surface. I took a long breath, trying to calm myself. After that, Ryder completely stopped contributing financially to the household. He ignored my messages about living expenses, leaving me to manage everything on my own. My love for him began to erode, and thoughts of divorce crept into my mind. Disappointed by his irresponsibility, I chose to delay addressing the issue, unwilling to burden my father with more worries. For now, I relied on my savings, carefully accumulated before our marriage. Life without Ryder became a strange new normal. I grew accustomed to his absence and even began to enjoy the quiet, peaceful days spent with my dad. That tranquility was shattered when my father suddenly collapsed. At the hospital, we received the devastating news he didn't have much time left. Overwhelmed with grief, I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, forcing a smile through my tears, and telling him he'd get better. My dad tried to smile back, though sadness lingered in his eyes. When I went home to gather some of my things, the empty house, filled with memories, felt unbearable. The loneliness hit me like a wave, and I broke down in tears. During this heartbreaking time, Ryder sent me a message that was as cold as ice. Asterisk, since we're living separately, handle your own expenses. Maybe you can use your father's pension, asterisk. In rage, I threw my phone across the room. At that moment, my feelings for Ryder disappeared entirely. Realizing it was pointless to dwell on him, I composed myself and prepared to return to the hospital. Just as I was leaving, a letter arrived in the mail, bringing unexpected good news that could potentially change everything. Setting the documents aside for later, I rushed back to be with my father. His condition worsened rapidly, and I knew the end was near. I spent every moment I could by his side, and each night I returned home in tears. When he finally passed, it was peaceful, and I was there with him in his last moments. The loss was overwhelming, but his memory remained etched deeply in my heart. With the help of family, we arranged a beautiful funeral. Not surprisingly, Ryder and his family didn't attend. I hadn't informed them directly, and frankly, I didn't care. A few days later, after settling the estate, Ryder unexpectedly showed up at my door, bags in hand. "It's been a while. I heard your father passed away," he said casually. His presence reignited a spark of anger in me, but I kept my composure. "What do you want? And what's with the luggage?" I asked coolly. "Isn't that a bit harsh for a husband coming home?" He replied with a smirk. Oh, and the luggage. Just some of my parents' things. Hearing him refer to himself as my husband felt like a cruel joke. After everything, how could he still play that role? Were you waiting for me? Jobless, struggling alone with expenses, and looking after your father. Are you so happy you're speechless? He sneered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I stared at him silently, refusing to rise to his bait. No. Seems I'm the one caught in your plan, Ryder added mockingly. His mention of a plan caught my attention, so I pressed him to explain. What he said next left me stunned. Living with an old man was something I couldn't stand. But if I'd asked for a divorce, I wouldn't have gotten this house. So I played the perfect husband, made you dependent, and ensured you'd be stuck taking care of him. Once it was over, the house would be mine, he concluded smugly. I stared at Ryder in disbelief, fury building within me. Your story doesn't even add up. You abandoned me and stopped paying the bills, I shot back. Diddy scratched his head in irritation. Yeah, I lost patience. But I figured you'd never actually file for divorce. His smug grin made me question everything I'd ever seen in him. How had I ever loved this man? I couldn't stand to look at him or listen to him any longer. The plan worked, he said confidently. This house might be old, but it's spacious and well located. Starting today, my parents and I will live here. Could anyone be more self-centered? As I stood there, too stunned to speak, he continued hurling insults. This house of your father's is mine. Get out, he barked. Watching his parents' belongings being moved in, I realized Ryder was completely oblivious to the truth. His overconfidence was almost laughable. Unable to hold it in, I burst into laughter, leaving him utterly confused. Are you crazy? He asked, his expression twisting in bewilderment. He snapped. That word describes you perfectly. I replied, laughing as I prepared to reveal the truth. Didn't you know? This is my house. It could never be yours. Ida froze, stunned, as I continued. Besides, we're no longer related. Didn't your mother tell you? Shocked, Ryder immediately called someone, likely his mother. What? Mom, Em is saying something strange. We're not divorced, right? I overheard him say, his voice tinged with panic. Listening to his frantic call, I watched as the realization finally dawned on him. After he hung up, Ryder's face twisted in confusion. Did you really file for divorce? He asked. Yes. I replied with a smile. The day my father went to the hospital, your mother sent me the completed form, which I gladly submitted. She has her moments, doesn't she? I added. Damn it, Ryder muttered. It wasn't meant to be filed. That was just in case, not for real, he lamented. But you filled it out, didn't you? Intentions aside, I completed the divorce as you wanted. You should thank me, I said calmly, feeling relieved. His mother's harassment had ironically given me the opportunity to finalize the divorce I'd been wanting. Later, Ryder anxiously asked, who will get the house? I dismissed his concerns. Since we lived together briefly and my father still held the assets at the time of our divorce, there's nothing to divide. But what about the savings? My ex-husband pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. Even the savings you had before marriage should be split. Your claim has no basis. I replied calmly. He turned pale, stammering as he tried to argue but failing to form a coherent response. Though tempted to mock him, I kept my composure. "Let's end this here," I said firmly. "Bringing your belongings into someone else's home uninvited is trespassing. If you stay any longer, I'll have to call the police." At this, Ryder quickly gathered his things and left. I sprinkled salt at the entrance, prayed by my parents' portraits, and said, "This is for the best. I'll grow stronger. Please watch over me." Thinking of my parents reunited in heaven brought me comfort. Determined to start fresh, I began searching for a job. With a friend's recommendation, I quickly secured a position that suited my skills. A few days later, Ryder messaged me. Sorry for being stubborn. I wanted to start over. That's why I came to the house. I found it absurd. I considered replying but chose to ignore him. Still, Ryder kept sending poetic messages like a persistent suitor. I shared each melodramatic note with my coworkers, hoping for inspiration in my work as an illustrator for a cartoon editorial. "Look, the melodramatic stalker is back," I joked. Ryder had become a source of amusement, but his messages only made me uncomfortable, so I continued ignoring them. One day the doorbell rang. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Ryder. Surprised, I immediately called the police. "I know you're in there. I see your car. Please just listen. I'm really in trouble," he pleaded. "My parents sold their house because we thought we'd move in here. I have nowhere else to go. Help me." I felt no sympathy. Their assumption that this house was theirs only showed their entitlement. The police convinced Ryder to leave, though he resisted until they escorted him away. After I ignored Ryder's Romeo emails, my in-laws began reaching out, first calling, then emailing. When I didn't respond, their tone turned accusatory. How can you ignore our situation and not reach out? We were family once. Isn't it cruel to be so indifferent? You made us lose our home, and now we're stuck in a rundown apartment. Why not give us the house? You must have inherited it from your father. You're not struggling financially, and we quit our jobs. Take responsibility. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. Could they be so oblivious to others? At first, I tried to ignore them, but eventually, I blocked Ryder and his family. Changing my contact information felt drastic, but blocking them wasn't enough. One day, my ex-in-laws showed up at my door. Their voices loud. "Come out. You know we're struggling. Let's get back together. How can you ignore someone in need? What kind of person does that?" They shouted, knocking persistently. I didn't hesitate to call the police. Suddenly the noise stopped. Peeking through the peephole, I saw an unfamiliar man confronting my former in-laws. "Go home," he said sharply. "You're bothering people." My former in-laws looked puzzled by the man's unexpected appearance. "What did you say? Who are you? Are you her new lover?" They shot back. Unfazed, the man looked at them coldly. "Your behavior is the problem. Look around, this is a residential area. People are gathering because of you." "You're causing a disturbance," he retorted. Through the peephole, I saw neighbors gathering. It was embarrassing, but watching my ex-family flustered was oddly satisfying. When the police arrived, one officer recognized Ryder. "It's you guys again. the officer said. My ex-in-laws turned red with embarrassment. How much trouble will you keep causing? Get a grip, the officer added. I thanked him as he left, feeling relieved as I watched my ex-in-laws being escorted away and the neighbors dispersing. Hours later, the doorbell rang again. I looked through the peephole and saw the same man. Hesitating, I opened the door cautiously. With a walled smile, he said, "It's been a while. You should have told me you were back." I recognized him, but couldn't quite place him until he added, "Don't tell me you've forgotten. It's been over 10 years. Remember me? I'm Frank." Hearing his name brought back a flood of memories. "Frankie, now I remember," I exclaimed, smiling. Frank, my childhood friend from next door. We hadn't seen each other since we changed schools. Finally remembered her. Frank laughed. "I moved back here, so we're neighbors again. It's been so long, and I wanted to thank you for earlier. It really meant a lot to me." "Thanks again," I said. Frank just laughed, making me smile. We reminisced and I shared some recent struggles. He promised to be there for me, proving he was still a reliable friend. When I mentioned my father's passing, Frank offered to pay his respects and help in any way he could. Frank's respects and the memories of our childhood brought me a sense of comfort. Having someone who shared my past was a true solace in the midst of everything. A few days later, I received a shocking letter from a law firm. It accused me of infidelity and demanded I pay damages. Shortly after, I received an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, * regarding the notification *. The email read, * your ex-husband, Ryder, has filed a lawsuit for marital infidelity. Admitting it now will avoid escalation. We plan to notify your workplace. To protect your future, we recommend resolving this soon. The threat was thinly veiled and felt more like a desperate attempt at intimidation. I suspected it was orchestrated by my former in-laws and not a real legal professional. To confirm, I consulted a lawyer who verified my suspicion. The supposed attorney wasn't even registered. Deciding to play along, I replied that I would consider their claims if they provided proof of my alleged infidelity. They responded, * Ryder endured immense emotional distress, and we seek compensation for that * still. They provided no evidence. Their lack of proof made it clear no real professionals were involved. I replied, * it's hard to believe a professional would act on such unfounded claims. Don't you agree? Their response was oddly emotional. * we're moved by Ryder's passion and want to help him. We expect your sincere cooperation and don't wish to escalate this further. Quite emotional for a professional, I replied coolly. * impersonating a lawyer is illegal, you know. Just to confirm, do you hold legitimate qualifications? *. After that, their responses stopped. Days later, I received one final message. * I'm a professional, but your arguments were unbeatable. We're withdrawing the lawsuit. There's no need to withdraw, I replied. * calm about being falsely accused and am ready to defend myself legally. I look forward to meeting this passionate lawyer in court. That was the end of the communication. However, the silence didn't last long. Late one night, my former in-laws appeared at my door, loudly begging for forgiveness. We made a mistake. Please spare us from the lawsuit, they cried. Achant and furious, I shouted, "Stop disturbing me." My sudden anger took them by surprise. Grabbing my father's wooden sword nearby, I warned firmly, "Come any closer, and I won't overlook it." I former mother-in-law and Ryder cowered, whispering, "We're so sorry." "If you were truly sorry, you'd have changed your ways. Don't ever show up here again," I said sternly. Noticing flashing lights outside, I realized my neighbors had called the police. The officers quickly took my former in-laws away. Our ex-mother-in-law tried to claim she threatened us with a wooden sword, but the police dismissed her complaint after I explained I had grabbed it for self-defense during their late-night harassment. Frank, who had been nearby, testified that my former in-laws had been harassing me repeatedly. The police concluded their actions were malicious. Finally, peace was restored. Following Frank's advice, I reported the incident, and with his testimony, the process was smooth. He even joked, "Your voice was terrifying that night." Soon after, a restraining order was issued, and my former in-laws never bothered me again. Someone had recorded the late-night commotion, and it ended up online, making them the talk of the neighborhood. I'm not sure how they're living now, but I suspect they're relying on the retirement funds of my ex-in-laws. As for Frank and me, we grew closer in the months that followed. Eventually, he confessed his feelings, and we started dating. Frank has a way of bringing a smile to my face, and the time we spend together is truly joyful. It feels as though this happy turn of events is a gift from my father, filling me with gratitude and hope for the future.